Welcome to the All Things Wildfire podcast, where we delve into the latest trends and hot topics in protecting properties against wildfire. So sit back, relax, and join us as we arm you against disaster.
All right, guys, welcome to another podcast. What you don't know that I'm going to tell you is we actually were doing the podcast for a few minutes, and then I forgot to record. So we're doing this. This is our second take of the first 60 seconds. So anyways, what I love about these types of things is that sometimes they go really, really well, and sometimes they don't, and that's okay, man. That's part of life. That's part of what we do in as far as our personal development. So I love that piece. So, guys, let me introduce two people: Jeff Emery from Perimeter Solutions and Rich Snyder with Allied Disaster Defense. Now, the main person that I wanted to kind of emphasize and focus on is Jeff, because Jeff is the president of the Global Fire Safety at Perimeter Solutions, which is part of, they actually manufacture PHOSCHEK. And when I think about PHOSCHEK, my friends, and that maybe it's similar to you, is, when the wildfires are on and we could see them on television, I think a lot of us, at least for me, or, for the past few years, is like, when's the tanker coming? When's the PHOSCHEK coming? We want to see the drop, right? We want to see that there's help on the way that's aerial, because you could see the firefighters doing all they possibly can on their own, and it seems like an insurmountable objective to try and turn off the fire or manage the fire until we see this tanker show up and just dump a bunch of PHOSCHEK. And so to me, I see PHOSCHEK as a superhero as they come in and they help with the wildfires. But Jeff, I'll let you jump in, my friend. Let us know a little bit about you, and then we'll jump into some questions about PHOSCHEK and what it does and how it works and all those good things on what we can do to actually help against a wildfire.
All right, OP. Well, thanks for having me on today. This is going to be a lot of fun. Yeah, just to give you a little background on Perimeter Solutions and who we are. You mentioned it already. What we're most known for is PHOSCHEK. And for those who don't know, PHOSCHEK is the brand name of the fire retardant that's used. The red stuff you see dropping out of the planes, that is PHOSCHEK. It's one component of the business. And you mentioned the superhero aspect. I think from our perspective, we view the superheroes as the firefighters who are on the ground, who are doing the hard work day in, day out when there's a big campaign fire. And our mission and the mission of our company is really to protect those firefighters and enable them to protect property and save lives. That's fundamental to who we are. It's a key value that we all share, and it's something that's been in place for 60 years now. So just this year, we're actually celebrating our 60th anniversary of the first commercialization of PHOSCHEK. So
boom, happy anniversary, PHOSCHEK. I love it. I love it. And I'll introduce Rich here. Rich has been spraying PHOSCHEK from the ground for 30 plus years. And so I wanted to bring both of you guys in, because you have the manufacturer of PHOSCHEK, and then you have what I see is someone who's really the innovator and the groundbreaking person who's been able to apply it from the ground and kind of show what's possible from the ground. So Rich, I'll let you introduce yourself.
Yeah, Rich Snyder. It's good to see everyone this morning. Yeah, I've been doing ground applied PHOSCHEK since 1990. So half of those years. I know I may look like it's been all those years, but it's only been half of those years that I've been doing ground applied. We started with the old the powdered G75 back then, and have transitioned into the LCs and have built a couple different PHOSCHEK tenders over the years and train on it. And it's been a lot of fun, and we're still doing it. We're still doing it. I was just retired 36 years in the fire service as a fire captain and an engine boss, and also fire marshal. So I get involved with fire codes and building construction and fire behavior. And now,
congratulations, brother, on the retirement.
Thank you. And now I'm working with Allied, with OP and the team, and we're having a lot of fun.
Awesome. Yeah. So guys, I'm going to want to dive into what we do here locally. But first, I want to start like global, right? I want to start up at the top, and understand what's happening with Perimeter Solutions and what they do, and then we can bring it down to our local level here in California, on the western side of the United States, or even the United States in general. So, Jeff, let me start off with some questions for you, brother. I know that Perimeter Solutions is, I think, a worldwide brand. Is that right?
That's right. Yeah, we operate in every continent, and anywhere where you see a wildfire threat, you can expect to see us. And
Awesome.
I think the unique thing about that is it's not just about getting material around the world, right? You think about PHOSCHEK as the chemical itself, but just as important in this whole operation is having the people on the ground, having the equipment to be able to mix the product effectively, to distribute the product effectively, having the logistics to move all that around effectively on a moment's notice. That's something that we've had to establish in country after country. And so you look around the world and some places you'd expect. Outside of the US, you have Canada, Australia, France, Chile, areas that are vulnerable to the threat of wildfire. And some areas maybe wouldn't expect. Israel, for instance, it has one of the biggest wildfire threats in Europe, the second largest volume that's consumed in Europe. So we are in a lot of different countries. We have a direct presence around the world in those locations, and it's something we take a lot of pride in, and our ability not just to have product available in those locations, but the people and the equipment to support it.
I love that. I love that. That's exciting. That's so exciting to be, so have a product that people actually need, and that really just helps us with, especially in the last, I don't know, 7 to 10 years, things have been getting so chaotic with wildfire that, I'm seeing a lot of innovation out there, but I really love the idea and the fact that you guys are in multiple countries. I do want to touch on France, though. It sounds like France, I feel like they're kind of the out of the box thinkers, where they're using a lot of your product, and they're doing things a little differently than what we do here. So can you kind of unpack that, Jeff, and kind of let us know kind of the ins and outs of what they're doing?
Yeah, I think you hit it on the head. Every country is a little bit unique in the way that they apply the aerial assets that they may have available to be able to drop retardant, the support on the ground, the engagement between a federal agency and local municipalities. I think every country is a little bit different, and France is unique. France has been at it for some time. And if you look at the 2022 season that we just came out of, it was probably the most devastating wildfire season that country has seen. We actually, in the first 2 weeks of July of last year, we went through as much retardant as we had forecast for the season. The fires were
Oh
that
my
intense
goodness.
and that widespread across the country. And one of the real unique things I think about France is the fact that out there we have two different products that we sell in France, and one is designated for ground applied applications, one for aerial operations. The interesting thing is almost 40% of the retardant that was used last year was applied on the ground, and 60% in the air. Whereas you look at the US, at a typical US operation, it's more like 90-10 aerial to ground applied. And that comes from a few reasons, right? Number one, just the aerial assets. They don't have quite as many high capacity LATs and VLATs that we may have available in the States. But two, the desire for precision, right? Those precision applications. And just imagine yourself in France, and suddenly the wine supply in Bordeaux is being threatened by a wildfire. You can imagine the reaction, right? They hold that pretty near and dear. And so being able to get out and protect those vineyards very, very precisely through some of the ground applied work was one of those assets and one of the unique capabilities that they had built up over the years, and in engagement between their federal agency and the local fire brigade. So we had a big season last year over there. Certainly had to react extremely quickly in terms of getting additional product out to support the operations they had going on, both on the ground and in the air. But it's interesting, and as you see different countries now coming together, new countries starting to emerge and establish their capabilities, every situation is a little bit unique, and so that's part of the role that we play is helping educate, helping train, helping give some advice about how to think about that balance between the different types of applications and where they may want to where they may want to pre-position both assets, equipment, and the product itself.
Boom. I love that. You know, it's so true. I think here in the U.S., we imagine everyone's got tankers, everyone's dumping PHOSCHEK in mass quantities. But when you're limited, you're using the assets that you have to be able to disperse it. But I like the precision piece of the ground application, because there are, as much as we love to see the PHOSCHEK being dropped in neighborhoods, sometimes we're also seeing that, you know, cars and houses are being drenched with this, and it may not be as precise as we would like, but the ground application allows that flexibility to be very precise as to the vegetation, the area, even, you know, depending on where the wind is coming from, where you're going to apply. So I love that idea. I think here in the U.S. we could begin to take notes about that and really understand how we can apply it like that too, more on a precision basis.
Yeah, you know, you think about topography and certain structures you want to protect. You can get in there with a firefighter and fight the fire as if it's there and get it laid out ahead of time in those key areas without dumping on the whole area. It's more effective, it's more efficient. You can control the level of PHOSCHEK. Yeah, it's really important that ground applied to in protecting structures. Yeah,
and I love
absolutely.
that. And I'll ask, you know, Rich and Jeff, what I think number one, Jeff, you know, when you talk about the wineries and Bordeaux being, you know, like on the verge of being burned, I guarantee you the Americans are throwing money over to France and saying, please protect our vineyards, right? Like, those assets are the assets that everyone loves and consumes. But outside of wineries, what other assets are unique or interesting that you've been asked to protect, Rich or Jeff, that really is kind of, you know, allows us to understand, wow, there's companies out there, or there's utility companies or other municipalities that are requesting certain things to be protected. Can you share a little bit about that?
Yeah, I can certainly rattle off a whole bunch of different areas. Obviously, you know, utility poles, when there's a fire coming, the last thing you want is utility poles falling over and potentially making that situation worse, sparking yet another ignition. And so a lot of the utility companies have been very proactive in going out and doing a small application to protect their utilities. Bridges, especially around rail, are a big area. The cost of having to replace a single bridge goes up into the tens of millions of dollars. And one application to protect it is a huge cost savings potentially when you think of the situation and the vulnerability that you may have and the economic impact of disruption to that rail system. That's another big area. But if you kind of take it back to that mission in the community protection, I know, Rich, you've got a lot of examples, but just think about the situation when a community is at risk. What do you often see? You may see a local department out there sitting with a water tender, constantly parked in front of a house, trying to put water down. What if instead of that local department just having to put assets across every house at risk, they're able to get out and do an application around each of those houses? How much more efficient could that be in terms of the use of those precious firefighting assets, the equipment they have? And Rich, maybe you have some more direct examples, but I know you've done a lot in terms of community protection as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think back to the Zaka fire. I was on that. I spent 9 days in a neighborhood because the fire was going to threaten once the weather changed. And we're prepping homes, but you think of a strike team of 5 engines and a chief that are trying to cover all of these homes, and you're sitting on it for 9 days. Well, right. What if you went in and you got things away from the house and put 100 feet of PHOSCHEK around it? Then you can move on. You can use less resources because you know that's already, the fire's not going to creep up to the house. And so I think it'll save a lot on strike teams and stuff. I remember I think it was the Williams fire. One night there we were protecting a communication site, and we were going to sit up there all night, and we knew the fire was going to come around. And so they came in and they did 4 drops of PHOSCHEK and painted us into the mountain, knowing that we're going to sit there all night. And I'm thinking the cost of 4 drops of PHOSCHEK versus ground applying PHOSCHEK, we could have done it in a fraction of the time, and a fraction of the money would have been much more effective. And we spent the night up there. And
hold on a second, Rich. Hold on a second.
I know. Look at that.
Who is this guy?
Look at this guy. Holy moly, what a nerd. But I think
I love it, man.
What could have, how much more effective and efficient it would have been for us to pinpoint the PHOSCHEK instead of throwing it out of an airplane.
Man.
So that's an example that I have. The Bobcat fire.
The other thing to think about, what's the most precious commodity right now in California outside of people?
Absolutely.
Water.
Well,
right?
We're doing okay this year.
This year may be a little bit different, but that won't last forever.
80 feet of snow in Mammoth. But this is a cycle. We've seen this before. And droughts are going to come back. And with all the rain we've had this year, people have got their guard down a little bit because, hey, we got no problem. We had rain. Problem is it's going to create more growth, especially the flashy fuels. And we're going to get into this cycle of drought again. It's always done it. It always will. And I think back to, I think it was the early 90s. We had a lot of rain in the early 90s. And then a few years later, we hit drought and we had a real bad fire season because all those fuels that are coming in right now, they're there. They're not going anywhere. And at some point, they're going to become flammable or combustible.
Great point. Jeff, can you elaborate a little bit?
Fire.
Yeah.
What's that?
I was going to say, Jeff, can you elaborate a little bit on your thoughts of, we've had, at least on the West Coast, really amazing winter, unprecedented. You've got, roofs collapsing in the mountainous communities because the snow level's so huge. And so there's a lot of abnormalities going on, but I feel, to Rich's point, like it gives a false sense of security in the future wildfire season when it gets hot and the summer kicks in. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I think Rich started hitting on it already. The result on the back end is going to be more growth, more fuel. And once that dries out and you have the right heat and wind conditions, potentially more devastating fires, right? So that's the cycle we've seen. It's very easy to sit here and just all you see in the news is flooding happening, lakes coming back that haven't been there for decades and decades, and kind of sit back and get into a sense of complacency around that. But if you look at the years over the last 15 years where you've had the greatest level of snowpack around this time of the year at the end of a season and the greatest rain levels during the off season, they actually equate to some of both the largest and smallest levels of acreage burned in California. And so we've done a lot. We've looked at that to try to see, is there a pattern we can follow? Is there a correlation here? And the simple answer is what it does is it extends the extremes a little bit, but it certainly doesn't take away the risk. And what I think we have to plan for, and what communities should be planning for, is maybe a little bit later start to the season, as as it takes a little while for that snow melt to come down, but potentially a very high activity late season, depending on what the wind and heat conditions become later in the summer. And so, I think it's just as important as ever to keep the awareness up that just because you have some of these rain events in an off season, that doesn't automatically translate into a reduced risk of wildfire as you get into those August, September, October months.
Got it.
Yeah.
Got it. Rich, any thoughts there?
Yeah, no, it's still going to dry out. The fuel's there. We create the rain is a temporary effect, and it actually increases the hazard in the future.
Roger that.
Yeah.
I can't help but to think about all of the potential applications here for PHOSCHEK. And, I know that there is no one silver bullet to, wildfire prevention or suppression. But the reality is that this is a key component that I think more people will begin to pay attention to as time goes on. And, like the stories, Jeff, you share about France, the fact that they're so innovative and they're so like jumping in that 40% of their purchases is for ground applied, because it sounds to me like they've got a lot more involvement, a lot more buy-in from the municipalities and maybe privates, I guess, companies that can come in and help really minimize the damage. And so I look forward to the overall gathering of our communities and municipalities and the forestry service and CAL FIRE to really come around what we can do in utilizing these types of products to help slow down the fire. So I'm excited about that. I'm really looking forward to in the next 12 to 24 months some real changes there. So foresters, CAL FIRE people, if you're listening, let's connect for sure. So Jeff, I want to jump into a little bit of innovation. I remember I was talking to, maybe it was Chris Grable. It sounds like you guys are beginning to create these PHOSCHEK tanks for helicopters to come in and come in there and suck the PHOSCHEK out and go over and spray. Is that something how long has that been going on? And are a lot of communities willing to tackle and use those types of resources?
Yeah, it's actually been going on for decades, right? So the idea of our portable operations is what we call it, or a mobile retardant base, an MRB, is something that we've set up, and we have a capability of setting up literally within hours. We'll bring a couple flatbeds out with all the equipment necessary to mix the product, to set up dip tanks with containment berms around it. All we need is a flat field where the helicopters can drop in, and we'll get everything set up in a matter of hours. So we have dedicated teams that's all they do over the course of the summer is rotate and be on call. What I think is been innovating over the last few years is how that's applied and where. So for instance, Orange County, LA County, Ventura County collaborated, and this is we're actually jumping into year 3 of this initiative. That's called the Quick Reaction Force, and that's a program that actually utilizes Chinooks with night aerial capabilities to be able to drop in and much more rapidly attack a new fire, a new ignition in areas that are prone with wildland urban interfaces, right? So you think about those three counties. There are a lot of areas where you can't just wait until the morning and let things burn through. They want to be able to react as fast as possible. And what they've found is by having that capability, by having that immediate response, they're able to reduce the impact. And there's a major, both obviously a less impact to the environment and to the communities, but also a major economic improvement of being able to spend a lot less on suppression in those situations where it is threatening a community. So it's been a great program. It's one that, like I said, we're in year 3, and I think a lot of people around the whole industry have been taking a close look at. And I think just now, as the advancements in avionics and capabilities allow a lot more effective and safe night operations for the pilots, you're seeing more and more appetite where people are considering moving to a similar model in predominantly areas that are heavy with wildland urban interface situation.
Boom. I love that. Jeff, I'm just gonna jump out and talk about really quick about drones. There is a company that we're invested in, and we actually have some ongoing conversations about testing. There's a company called Parallel Flight, and this company, this founder is one that helped create the Tesla diesel truck. And so he left Tesla and started working on, hey, I need to create this drone that can, create a lot of capacity. And part of what he's building is a hybrid drone that is going to allow drones to be out in the sky for 2 hours plus versus 20 minutes that drones have now. Plus, it's going to be able to hold hundreds of pounds of weight. So when I met him a year and a half ago, I'm like, yeah, we need to connect, because I feel like part of the future and innovation could be drones like this set up to be able to help communities strategically. And the cool thing that I like also is that these drones are able to be flown in 40 plus mile an hour winds. And so it's impressive to see what's coming. And I know there's a lot of rules and regulations around, being able to fly these types of unmanned vehicles. And so there's probably, it's going to take probably a few years before something like that happens. But to me, like, I look forward to seeing an army, right, of just drones flying out to go out there and save a community. So anyways, that's just my mind, and being able to go like, hey, this is really cool. I think that would be really awesome to apply and to execute on. Now, I want to jump into, Jeff, we talk a lot about the helping the firefighters when we have a large scale incident. And, let's talk a little bit about communities. Let's talk about like HOAs and communities that are in the WUI that are vulnerable. What have you seen? And Rich, maybe this is a question for you too, but what have you guys seen people do to help the communities in that type of protection when we have a high wildfire season?
Oh, I think first and foremost, well, vegetation management is always the beginning of everything. You have to have vegetation management. Without that, don't bother doing anything else. You got to get the radiant heat and the ember cast down. And so vegetation management at the beginning.
And Rich, really quick, I think that's such a great point, because we've been to many inspections where the customer says, hey, that tree that's like over my house and touching my eaves, don't touch that. I love that tree. And it's like, are you serious? Like, what are we doing here? So to your point, the management of the vegetation is crucial, because otherwise you're bringing the fire to your property, right? That's what I've learned from you, Rich, and being able to manage that. So it's just still very interesting to me that homeowners are so tied to the vegetation for one reason or another, that they're willing to have the conversation in their mind and justify keeping that piece of vegetation that may be vulnerable because they like the aesthetics, versus understanding the massive risk that it's bringing to the home and to the family. So I just wanted to
absolutely. And the other one that probably the most important one after vegetation management is that 0 to 5 feet from the home, from the embercast. This is where 90% of the homes are lost. And this is something a homeowner can do on their own on the weekend. And that's clear out that 0 to 5. But like you just said, people like their roses and their plants next to the house, and they make that decision. Do I want this beautiful plant, or do I want to lose my house? And that's another challenge we run into when they say, this is a hazard. Well, I can't get rid of that. The grandma planted those roses 80 years ago. Well, that's what's going to take your house out, right? But that's such a simple thing that homeowners can do, and it's so important. And it doesn't cost that much. Just clear that out, that first 5 feet. And that's actually coming down into the code, California code, within the next, I think by the end of this year or next year, where you're going to be required to have that 0 to 5 clearance. So, but that one's a real simple one.
Yeah. Now, Rich, how have you used PHOSCHEK around communities, like, HOA communities? You got homes on a hillside or tucked in within the hill that are very vulnerable. What have you done to?
Yeah, so we've gone out, we've talked a little bit about infrastructure, and I showed you the picture of the communication site. but hillside communities where you've got, the topography, we've got a canyon that'll bring the fire up to it. We can pre-treat into that canyon, and it's not red. We use the clear stuff. I mean, if someone wants to paint it red, we'll paint it red. They want a blue. I'm thinking Perimeter could probably make it blue if we want.
I think that's a good point, Rich. We haven't mentioned that, but only because I'm already in tune with, the red. The PHOSCHEK is not necessarily red, right?
No.
It comes clear and it's dyed red, so that way the pilots can see where they're dropping.
And if you want to see where it is going, and that's important too, because an example is for the Bobcat fire, we for the cities of Arcadia, Monrovia, and Sierra Madre, as the fire was coming forward, I contacted Perimeter and I ordered 4 totes of the red PHOSCHEK.
Nice.
Which they were a little confused. It was not going to an airport, but I convinced them to take it to my city yards. And we mixed up that PHOSCHEK and we applied it around the Monrovia Trask Boy Scout camp, a historical Boy Scout camp, and to protect the buildings. And the fire did come through about 6 days later, and the camp was saved.
Nice.
We used it in all 3 cities for evacuation routes. Just painted the hillsides red. And when strike teams were coming in, a different strike team every day, they knew, oh, look at this, there's PHOSCHEK. Of course, they're amazed at how accurate the pilots were, how they put it here and not there. They didn't know it was ground applied, but yeah, we were able to create, expand evacuation zones, protect water sites, water pumping sites, telecommunications, historic buildings, and it was very effective. And here's an example. This is a picture that says a lot. This is at the Calder fire I was at last year or 2 years ago. And they made a drop onto the forest trees. And as the PHOSCHEK came down and got onto the ground fire came through later. And you could see where the PHOSCHEK actually hit the ground versus the trees were shedding the PHOSCHEK. And it created this interesting patchwork of, it's not going to burn. The PHOSCHEK's there. So these are types of things that we can do. Now, that was obviously an emergency response, but we can apply this ahead of time. I've applied it in Chantry Flats Road. It's a road going up into the Angeles National Forest. I applied it in July in preparation for the 4th of July. In September, we had a vehicle fire on the mid-slope road right up next to the vegetation, fully involved, burning into the vegetation. And it never turned into a wildland incident. And I came out for the investigation, and the engine company was so proud of the hard work they did. And I said, well, I'll let you guys have that one. Really, it was the PHOSCHEK, but so this stuff's, very effective. It works until it's washed off, and it'll last all season. And we've got documented cases in Sierra Madre, Monrovia with the Trask Boy Scout camp, and many cases around the Rose Bowl. Because every year, well, the last 30 years, we've been applying it around the Rose Bowl in the Linda Vista and Arroyo Seco neighborhoods in preparation for the 4th of July, because they have a big fireworks show, the America Fest fireworks show. And one of the problems is people would come into the parking lots and all the surrounding neighborhoods to watch the fireworks show, and they bring their own fireworks. And so they saw an increase in wildfires and vegetation fires. And so we've been using it since 1990, we've been applying it around the Rose Bowl successfully. And we have documented cases of fires that just didn't take off. And now Allied is now doing that annually in conjunction with the city of Pasadena. And there's a science to it. It's not as simple as mixing the stuff and applying it. You have to measure it. We have planned maps, coverage levels. The whole program is in place. Now, this is how we used to do it. When I first started, when I took over the program, it was an old water tender, and we sat on top and just sprayed it. We've come a long way, because now there's definitely a science to it. So these are things that we can do. It's endless. You just come up with an idea. We got the latest was a fire marshal who contacted us because they've got with their homeless encampments. They're having a lot of fires, and they're like one instance agency up in the high desert. They're getting like 20 responses a day, and so the fire marshal contacted, hey, what can we do? We can go in there and pre-treat that whole area. You're still going to have the fires, but they're just going to stay small. We had the one Grant Ray Park we did for 4th of July. We applied 1,400-foot line of fire retardant. An arsonist came by. It's on video of him trying to let the vegetation on fire. And the fire got about 2 feet by 2 feet in this hazardous brush. Another case where the engine company thought they were just spot on and say, like I say, we'll let them have it. But yeah, this stuff really works. I mean,
I love it. I love hearing these testimonials, especially this last one, because, you know, this guy was caught on tape, Jeff. I don't know if you know. This guy was literally trying to ignite the brush. And the quality of the video is pretty poor, but you see like the park manager jumping over the fence, chasing this guy. And you hear other people saying, don't, you know, it's not worth it. Leave the guy alone. And then he's like, what are you trying to do? And you almost see this fight that's about to start. But what ended up happening is when we went back and we heard about this, you could see about maybe 4 foot square where the ignition actually took place, and it was black and it ignited and then it just turned itself off. And so impressive. And I really do. I look forward to seeing a lot more of these testimonials because, you know, as much as people see, you know, the PHOSCHEK being dropped from a plane, they actually begin to question like, okay, you're going to spray this on my vegetation. It's going to be clear. Is it really going to work? And it's like, it's the same product and we're mixing it appropriately. So the efficacy is there because everything's being followed as it's supposed to render the vegetation to prevent wildfires. So I'm excited, Jeff. Do you have any testimonials that we could share?
You know, it's really fascinating when you see a situation like that and what you're observing where you see that spot and that small area that's charred is essentially chemistry in action, right? So there is actually one thing that's unique about the PHOSCHEK. PHOSCHEK is ammonium phosphate, right? Which is essentially a fertilizer, but the chemical reaction between the fuel of fire and the PHOSCHEK actually creates a char, a carbon layer that prevents further ignition from happening. And you can go up and try to relight it and it just will not happen. And it is chemistry, right? It's true chemistry, and it's what's unique about PHOSCHEK versus anything else that's been attempted in this market. We even used to use previously an ammonium sulfate product decades ago that would smolder a little bit and it didn't have that same chemical reaction. And that's one of the unique pieces around PHOSCHEK. So an example that we've seen these last couple of years, we've been working with the county of San Diego, right? And in doing roadside, and there's an area called Wildcat Canyon, huge uphill, high risk. They've seen over the years, dozens every year, dozens of ignitions happening along this stretch of highway. So we collaborated with the county, have done ground applied applications, started year one with just a few miles, moved up to about 20 miles the next year. This year, they're looking to probably triple that again because of the effectiveness we've seen. But after the fact, after the application, much later in the season, in order to try to validate and show the community, right, that this has been a service worthwhile, walking the line and you can see small little burn points, right? Might be this big of where an ignition happened. So roadside, it comes from brake pads overheating, right? Or brake pads falling off, a car overheating. There's a lot of somebody flicking out their cigarette. All of those things are potential ignition points, and roadside is one of the most common starts for fires. So all of those that could have become a much more devastating fire, a much more widespread fire, were stopped at the point of ignition. And I think that's the piece that when you see that and you start to appreciate what that means, think about the savings of doing it on the front end and the prevention aspect versus waiting till the back end and having to use mass amounts of retardant and resources and aerial assets in order to stop the fire on the back end of things. So those are as we see more and more of those examples, we're seeing states like Idaho that's just put a budget line item in for a similar roadside program. We're seeing this happen across the country now as people recognize that You know, it's one thing to sort of use ground applied for response. It's a whole nother option to go out and get out on the front end of it. And it's the same thing that you and the team have been doing with homeowners now for many years. So it's great to see that that piece, because it's obviously it creates more safety. It prevents potential responses and potential large scale fires from emerging, and it's much more economic as well, right? It's
Yeah.
a much more economic
Yeah.
solution. And community wise, I do want to come back, Rich. One thing you mentioned was with the Boy Scout camp, I think the evacuation routes. And I
Yeah.
think that's an area hasn't been thought through as often as maybe it needs to be. And I have to do is think back to the images, some of these videos that community members, like in Paradise at the campfire, you see some people trying to get out on roads where there's just embers falling from every direction, and it's a scary sight to see. One of the more effective tools that we have, I think, as communities are thinking about resilience and setting up their evacuation plans, is simply applying PHOSCHEK and pre-treating those evacuation routes, and having a couple routes out that are pre-treated. That's going to give that layer of protection, at least, and allow people, even if the community is at risk, to at least protect lives and get people out of harm's way as safely as possible. And we're seeing now more appetite with grants, the fire safe grants and others, to be able to support those kinds of activities by communities, to be proactive. Every community that's at risk typically has their evacuation routes. They have them mapped out. They do a great job communicating those to their citizens. And what we maybe need to think about more is, how do you protect those evacuation routes in those events?
Boom.
Yeah.
I love
We
that.
do that Santa Anita Canyon Road. We've been doing that for years, putting in about 150 feet. It's a mid-slope road.
Yeah.
With, on the weekend, there could be, 9,000 people up at the campground in this 3-mile mid-slope road going through the forest. We put this 150-foot PHOSCHEK line, that two-lane road, that 40-foot road just became 200 feet.
Mhm.
So, yeah, very
That's
effective.
awesome. I part of what we do, Jeff, in our educational outreach is, we're working with fire marshals and really helping them understand or give them examples so their mind can open up as to the possibilities of what they can do to protect their cities with the use of PHOSCHEK. And the example you gave is absolutely accurate, because when I think about evacuation routes, I'm thinking about Paradise and the videos of the people, and you could hear the fear in their voice as they're going through, and you could almost feel the heat with them, because they're frightened about how hot it is, and these trees, walls of fire ignited all around them. And for you fire marshals that are listening, man, this would be a perfect opportunity for you to plant the seed with the community as to, hey, let's look at this option. Because the last thing you want is to have some of the devastation that took place in Paradise. And I feel like these examples are there for us to learn from them, and be shameful not to take advantage of some of these tools that are out there to really help the communities evacuate. Like you said, Jeff, maybe the homes and the neighborhoods and the communities may not have already been hardened enough, but at least we can get safety, life and safety, right? Let's focus on getting the lives out, so that way, they're at least protected. So I love that.
And also protecting the firefighters. You can, we know our areas, we pre-plan our areas. You can have a fire safety zone for engine safety zone during a wildfire, and establish that ahead of time and put PHOSCHEK around that. And you now have a designated engine safety zone, escape zone.
Yep.
That's
What
in
a great
place.
idea, Rich, because I remember when you were at was it Caldor this last time, you had to make multiple stops to
Oh,
different
I was at the
safety
Windy. Yeah, the
Windy?
Windy fire. Yeah, we went to our temporary zone, which got overrun. Then we went to our our escape zone or our safety zone, which 2 other strike teams were also using, and it wasn't big enough. So we had to escape a 3rd time. But yeah, creating engine safety zones. We don't make this up as the fire happens. Fires are planned. I've fought fires in my town every year on paper and in my mind and
Right.
planning for these things. And this is a great area as an engine safety zone. And we pre-establish that and it's mapped out. So if I've got an engine coming in from Northern California, they've got a map and say, okay, I am not familiar with the area, but if everything goes wrong, here's my safety zone. And now if we can PHOSCHEK it and do everything, there's many uses for PHOSCHEK that we can tap into.
I love that.
Or should be tapping into.
Guys, I've got just a few more minutes here, but I'm gonna ask you guys about how long does it last, and then is it safe for pets in the our animals and stuff like that. But before I do, I just want to comment on the HOA front and on these communities that are on the hillsides. We've sprayed around the perimeter of hillsides to protect these homes, and it's interesting because you get, at least the ones that we've been applying at, you get the buy-in of the homeowner, the consumer, and when you divide up the cost among all the homes, it's fractions of dollars for them to invest, but they have this feeling, and they know my hillside that has a lot of wild vegetation is protected, and then it's up to them. Second piece is for them to harden their home. But for the HOA communities out there, this is absolutely a viable option, especially like the example Jeff gave, where you have these roads, and we all have them in our cities. You have these roads that have this tendency where there's mechanical failure with vehicles, and then you have ignition, and then it runs up a hill, and we see it time and time again. And the cool thing is there are answers on how we can prevent some of those things from taking off, and it's a small investment, completely worthwhile, and that's how I feel about PHOSCHEK. So,
well, you speak on the investment. We had an HOA that we gave them the price, and they looked at the price and went, "Wow, that's a significant investment." But when you divided it by the number of homes, it was $25 per home for the year.
Boom.
Okay, $25. To me, that's a no-brainer. And
Absolutely.
to them, once they divided it that way, went, "Yeah, that's a no-brainer. Yeah, $25 a home. Let's do it." So
yes,
it's all on how you think about it.
Absolutely. Love it. So, Jeff, is it safe for pets? I know people ask that all the time, and I know, for us, we've done our research, and we know that it absolutely, is QPL listed, et cetera. But what do you say to people when they start asking these types of questions?
It's absolutely safe to use if you have pets in the yard, children playing. We've been using this for decades, as we mentioned, and we've gone through extensive environmental impact studies. Got thousands of pages to look at the environmental footprint, and guess what? Since you talked about products 20, 30 years ago, we've continued to invest and innovate year after year after year to make the most environmentally friendly product that's available on the market today. And so people should feel absolutely 100% confident that they can let their dogs in the yard, they can sniff around, they can be around the vegetation that's been treated without any concerns for their health.
I love it. And I think, like you had said earlier, the product is largely fertilizer, right? So that's a big plus. And when I think about, you have these maintenance programs with pest control. Like, these guys are wearing gloves. Sometimes they're wearing goggles as they're spraying this in my yard. I'm like, seriously? I got to keep my dog away from that area, right? So and the mask, and you think about that, like, in comparison to what this product is, absolutely much, much safer than pesticides and things like that. So I love that. Now, Jeff, how long does a product last? We get this question all the time as to, What's the duration? Will it last, the entire year, a couple years? What does it look like? And, how would you answer that?
It's going to last until you see a significant rainfall. And typically the areas that are vulnerable, that are being protected, we recommend you're going to do it at a time of the year as you're getting into a dry season where those rainfalls are few and far between. So I think you guys, you probably speak with data of how often you've had to go back and reapply, but in a lot of the areas of the highest risk, typically you're not seeing those significant rainfalls throughout the heavy wildfire risk season. So it's important you don't do it too early in the year, right? You wouldn't have doing this in January of this year. You would have already washed off all the product that you had loaded on. Do it at a point where you're getting into the fire season. The timing is important, but once it's on there, I think a myth and a common misconception of retardant, people think about other firefighting foams or gels or things like that, and those require water to be effective at penetrating. They enhance the water, they help prolong the use of the water. The only reason that we have water in our PHOSCHEK is to deliver it to and apply it. Whether that be putting it in the air to be able to drop more effectively straight down into the line and the perimeter they're trying to line out, or to be sprayed out of a sprayer. It's for application. The product is effective once it dries out. It stays effective throughout the fire season unless you have a significant rain event that washes it away.
Boom, boom. And Rich, what would you say the times of the year here in Southern California would be applicable to apply the PHOSCHEK?
Yeah, so we don't get a lot of humidity down here. We don't get the thunderstorms that, of course, we did last year. We had a pretty significant one in July. But by July, end of July, we get into the dry season, and then oftentimes we won't see rain until December, January. And our peak fire season traditionally has been, hitting around. Traditionally, it's been like the end of August, middle of August. That's expanded in the last 15, 20 years. So, you want to get it out. You want to get it out there by mid-July.
Yeah.
The other thing is to have it ready. So if, let's say we're into October and they say, hey, next week we've got, low humidity and potential winds, we could go out and double check and reapply then. The whole idea is to get this out there before the fire.
Yes. We do have some clients that they'll have us apply in June, July, and then Santa Ana winds, start to come in. It's like, hey, we want to apply again just to triple check and make sure that we're not vulnerable. Another point that I'd like to make before we close here is, the prevention piece of PHOSCHEK is crucial for many reasons. But Rich, when I think about some of the stories that you shared as far as the limited capacity of the firefighters, like, people, I don't think realize enough that when you have an incident, any help you can get, where if you have PHOSCHEK sprayed on this hillside, you don't have to necessarily be so concerned about that. You can move your resource to other places because there aren't enough firefighters to respond to an incident. And I think that continues to be a message that we need to realize that, there's an incident, my friends. You're not going to have your neighborhood firefighter come to your home likely because he's probably or she's probably in another location trying to fight a fire. So you're going to have someone from a different state coming who doesn't know your property, who doesn't know your neighborhood. And so a lot of these things feel like chaos. And I think, man, if we can just come together and provide these plans of pre-application, I feel like that could be a big win to be able to help with the concern of not enough firefighters. Any thoughts there?
Yeah, you could spread the resources out. Instead of a strike team with one engine on each street for 5 streets, if you PHOSCHEK, how about a strike team that covers an entire area? You know, if I'm on an engine company and I'm babysitting 4 homes and fire can come from either side, and not a lot I can do with 3 or 4 people. We're going to do what we can. But if I've got 100 feet barrier around the structures, I'm going to breathe a little easier, and I'll commit. Maybe the fire's not going to get that close. I can what we call decision points. When the fire gets to a certain point, we plan ahead. Hits this point, we've got to hightail it out, because our lives are more important than the structures. But if I can put that barrier in there, then the firefighters, that decision point changes. And we're much more likely to stay in that area if we know we're protected, let alone the homes, life safety for the firefighters themselves.
Boom. Awesome. Well, Jeff and Rich, thank you guys for jumping on. Is there Jeff, anything you want to leave us with before we close out our podcast here?
No, I think we've explored a lot of different topics today, but it's always interesting to get on and chat with both of you. I think it's in this industry, I'll go back to the France example at the beginning. Bringing together people with different ideas, different thoughts on how to apply is really critical as we continue to evolve. This threat of wildfire has just gone up exponentially over the last decade, and I think a lot of communities are struggling to figure out how they can bring together this range of tools, and it can be overwhelming. And I think knowing that they have resources like Allied to be able to reach out to as thought leaders in the industry is helpful. Thought leaders like Perimeter, we spend a lot of our time working with those communities, working with those countries as new countries are seeing the threat of wildfire threat. We're working with them is a big part of making sure that we're protecting those communities, and it's that thought leadership that's really important here, and that collaboration that is going to help create the most resilient communities we can get. And so we truly value and appreciate the partnership we have with you.
Awesome.
Boom.
Yeah, great partnership.
I love it. And guys, I'll end with this. I'd like to have you invite me, Jeff, the next time France is trying to protect their wineries. I may not be able to go, okay? But I think I'm going to make it a mission for Napa. Like, I love Napa wines, and so I'm going to be wanting to protect our local Napa wineries. So I'll be reaching out to our local wineries and see what we can do to assist them to help with protection there also. So
my wife wants to know when we're going to open our office in France. So you can let me know. She's just curious.
I love it. All right, gentlemen, thank you so much.
All right.
Thanks.
All right, take care.
Rich.
Bye-bye.
That's all for this episode of All Things Wildfire. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to our show and follow us on social media to stay up to date on all things wildfire. And as always, thanks for listening.